This is Need to Know.
Since Roe v. Wade overturned state laws restricting abortion in the first trimester of pregnancy, states have passed more than 350 laws regulating or restricting access to abortion. Nearly 70 laws have been passed just this year, ranging from restricting funding, requiring waiting periods and counseling, and regulating facilities that perform abortions, to name a few examples. North Carolina this week became the latest. So while anti-abortion advocates haven't given up the goal of overturning Roe v. Wade, the anti-abortion movement has succeeded in making abortions tough to get in many states. The record of legislative successes has left many in the pro-choice movement debating why and how the anti-abortion or pro-life movement has been so successful. It was a question that came up in a Need to Know panel discussion on feminism last month. Our next guest, Charmaine Yoest, is the head of Americans United for Life. The organization has created at least 30 model bills restricting abortions, ready-made for states to adopt. She's here to talk about the movement's successes and strategy for the future. Welcome, Charmaine.
Hi, Allison. Thanks for having me.
Sure. I just want to make sure that we're clear and I'm not assuming something. Americans United for Life and other anti-abortion groups, you are focused on state laws presently, right?
Well, that's one element. That's certainly been a particular focus of ours. We're the oldest national pro-life organization in the country, and we're the legal arm of the pro-life movement. So we have a particular expertise at crafting constitutionally sound legislation for state legislators. But we also work here in Washington, D.C., where I am today, and also internationally. So it's a big issue, and there's a lot of different facets to it.
Well, in terms of the states, where are you with your goals?
Well, you know, this year has been absolutely remarkable. We have seen an unprecedented level of interest among pro-life legislators to really to raise the bar and make progress at restricting the right to abortion. So we're very excited. We've actually seen a doubling in the number of pieces of legislation that were introduced this past year.
Yeah, there are about 366 state laws on the books restricting access or regulating access to abortion. Can you explain to people how you help get these laws in place?
Well, we're a law firm. I work with a great team of constitutional experts who are attorneys who have focused on this particular niche in the law. And so we work with pro-life legislators. They come to us and ask for advice on, you know, if they're interested in introducing legislation, we're able to help them with that. A few years ago, we started putting out a book called Defending Life, which puts together as a compilation of the model legislation, the over 30 pieces that you mentioned that we have. And every year we update that and we send it out to legislators, and we've developed relationships across the country that have been very helpful in moving the ball on this.
For your organization specifically, at this point, are you just concentrated on the law, or are you trying to influence people in any way?
I have a PhD in politics, and we used to talk about that question all the time. You bat around what is the purpose of law, and there's an interaction between law and the culture that goes two ways. The law influences the culture, but the culture also influences the law. And you really can't separate the two. You have to do both at the same time.
We've talked about a lot of the successes, but there's been one or two surprising, I don't want to use the word failures, but outcomes that you would not like, let's say that way. In Wyoming, which is a fairly conservative state, a bill was rejected which would have required a pregnant woman to view an ultrasound before having an abortion. And some of the opponents said, you know what, that's a real intrusion into the patient-doctor relationship. So my question is about that tension, about the conservative values of government needs to step back and a smaller government versus bills that maybe call for the government to step into a relationship between a doctor and a patient. How do you navigate that territory?
Well, you know, in other places, our model, for example, requires doctors to offer women the opportunity to see a sonogram, to make sure that they know that that's available to them. Because what we find, what we hear from women across the country is that despite the fact that abortion moves forward under the banner of choice, very often we hear from women that they felt like they had no choice, that it's a time of extreme stress for them. So it's very, very important that women get all the information that there is available to them.
If the goal is to reduce abortions, I'm curious about your organization, where it stands about birth control, because a lot of healthcare is about preventative medicine, about never having to get to the point where you would need to have medical care. Is your organization in favor of helping women have more access to birth control and helping women have their birth control paid for by insurance companies?
That's not actually an issue that we address. We focus on life issues, on bioethics, on abortion, on end of life, on rights of conscience, but we do not address that issue because there are differences of opinion on that. The question of life and death, of when life begins and when life ends, is a scientific question that there isn't really a debate over.
Well, there is debate over it, though. But I'm just curious about why not approach birth control as an issue? If the goal is to reduce abortions or to make abortions unnecessary, birth control does that. Wouldn't that be an interesting addition to your legal palette?
Well, as I said, there's an awful lot of issues that can be addressed, and we stay really focused on this question of abortion itself, and it's really a red herring that the abortion lobby likes to bring up by conflating abortion and birth control, and that's why we try to stay very clear on differentiating between the two and what is and is not an abortion, because, you know, frankly, that would be carrying water for the other side to allow them to redefine the issue in that way and to confuse people.
What do you think would happen on the state's level if Roe versus Wade were overturned next week?
Well, that's a great question, because that's exactly why we're working so hard in the states, is because the day after Roe, many people think that that's the end of abortion, but actually it just becomes a 50-state question, and you start looking in the state houses as to each state gets to decide for themselves how they want to regulate abortion. So that's why we focus so heavily on state-based legislation, because that's where the actual discussion needs to take place.
During the course of this conversation, we've talked about some of your feelings and the like-minded feelings of people who are working towards ending abortion, and I, as a journalist, need to acknowledge that there are people who believe otherwise and there are statistics that support otherwise. So I'm wondering, with that in mind, do you think the two sides can ever reach common ground?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a lot of common ground on abortion. If you look at the polling data and where the American people are on abortion, there's a huge consensus on things like parental notification, informed consent, clinic regulations, banning partial birth abortion, not seeing federal and state funding for abortion. These are the issues that we work on because we think it's really essential to continue developing this societal and cultural consensus over how we approach the life issue. And these are all things that are slam dunk home runs that people really don't disagree about very much.
I'm sure there's someone at home right now who is probably disagreeing with you, but we do appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your opinions. Charmaine Yoest, thank you so much.
Thank you.
From our Health Beat,